The desert wind cut like glass across the New Mexico plains, driving sand into open wounds and memories best left buried. A wounded horse stumbled under the weight of a man, its hooves dragging shallow furrows through the dust. The rider's head hung low, hat tipped forward, blood seeping from a ragged hole above his boot. His name was Eli Carter, a rancher once known for his stubborn pride and steady hand. Now, all that remained was the sound of leather creaking and a whisper, "Mary," as he clung to his dying horse's mane. The horizon burned orange, swallowing the last light of day. Behind him, smoke still rose from the ruins of his ranch. He'd buried his wife there 2 nights ago, what was left of her. Bandits had come under the veil of darkness, stealing, burning, laughing, while he'd been away at the creek mending a fence. He'd heard the gunfire too late. The guilt was a wound deeper than the bullet in his leg. His horse stumbled, finally collapsing into the sand. Eli tumbled forward, landing hard. The air fled his lungs. He lay still for a long moment, staring at the stars breaking through the sky. Every muscle begged him to stop moving, to just fade into the dirt beside her. But his father's words echoed from some far-off corner of his mind, "You don't die till you've made it right, boy." He dragged himself forward, inch by inch, toward the shape of a dry riverbed. His hand brushed against something cold and smooth, the metal of his rifle, half buried. He pulled it close, clutching it like an old friend. The night deepened. Coyotes began to sing their lonely hymn. That's when he heard it. At first, he thought it was the wind, a soft, broken sound carried on the air. Then it came again, a voice, faint, trembling. A woman's voice. Eli froze. Every nerve tensed. Out here, a sound like that could mean anything, a trap, a ghost, or something worse. He reached for his revolver, eyes scanning the dunes. The moonlight caught on something pale half buried in sand not 50 yards away. He pushed himself up, limping, rifle in hand. The shape resolved slowly, a body. A woman's. She lay half covered in grit, her dark hair matted with blood and dust. Her skin was sunburned, her clothes torn, a crimson stain spreading from her side. Eli knelt beside her, unsure whether she breathed. He placed 2 fingers under her chin. A pulse, faint, but there. Her lips parted, and a whisper slipped out, so fragile it barely reached him. "It hurts, down there too." Her voice was barely more than air, but it carried a weight that froze him. Eli's first instinct was to pull back, to walk away before more trouble found him. This wasn't his fight. He'd already lost enough. But as he looked at her, the raw suffering carved into her face, something in him cracked. He tore a strip from his shirt and pressed it to her wound. She winced but didn't move. "You're gonna live, you hear me?" he muttered, voice hoarse. She didn't answer. Her hand twitched toward his wrist, gripping weakly, a plea without words. He glanced around. No footprints, no horses, just endless sand and silence. Whoever did this had left her for dead. The stars above looked cold and pitiless. Eli thought of Mary lying beneath the blackened timbers of their home. He remembered the way her hand had slipped from his when the roof fell in. He'd sworn he'd never feel that kind of helplessness again. "Damn it!" he muttered under his breath, fighting the weight of exhaustion. He slid his arms under the woman's body, lifting her as gently as he could. She was lighter than she looked, bones and bruises. He carried her toward the shallow shade of a rock outcropping, where the wind broke against the stone. He laid her down carefully, covered her with his coat, and started a small fire using the last match he had. The flame sputtered, catching on dry grass. Her breathing steadied a little. In the firelight, he finally saw her face. Young, maybe 20. High cheekbones, dark lashes, a faint scar at her jawline. Something about her didn't fit. He pushed the thought aside, focusing on her wound. When he reached to pull back the blood-soaked fabric, his hand stopped halfway. There was a mark beneath the torn cloth, burned into her skin, black and circular. The shape of an eagle inside a sun. His stomach dropped. He knew that symbol. The Mescalero Apache. He looked at her again, her dark hair, her tan skin, the sharp lines of her face, and it hit him. She wasn't a settler's daughter. She was one of them. The fire snapped, sending sparks into the wind. Eli's mind raced. The Mescalero were supposed to have been wiped out after the last army raid 2 years ago. If she was one of them, then someone had survived, and someone had made damn sure she didn't. He felt the desert shift, the air suddenly heavier, the silence deeper. Somewhere beyond the rocks, the wind carried a sound that made the hair on his neck rise. A cry, distant, echoing, sharp and rising like a knife through the dark. Not a coyote. An Apache war cry. Eli turned toward the sound, his hand gripping the rifle tight. The woman stirred beside him, whispering something he couldn't understand, a word in her language. The fire flickered across her face, painting her in gold and blood. He didn't know who she was, or why she'd been left to die. All he knew was that the night had teeth, and whatever was out there, it had found them. The night fell heavy and slow, wrapping the canyon in a hush so deep it felt like the earth itself was holding its breath. Eli sat by the small fire, watching the girl's chest rise and fall beneath his coat. Her breathing was shallow but steady. The flames painted shifting shadows across her face, and for a brief moment he saw Mary's reflection there, her gentle eyes, her broken whisper the night she died. He looked away, jaw tight, and fed another twig into the fire. The desert around him seemed endless, the same unforgiving wilderness that had taken everything from him. The wind whistled through the rocks like a warning. His leg throbbed from the bullet wound. Every movement was a dull agony. But he forced himself to stay awake. Out here, sleep could be a death sentence. The girl stirred, muttering something in a tongue he didn't know. Eli leaned closer. "Easy," he said quietly. "You're safe for now." Her eyelids fluttered open. For the first time, he saw the full weight of her gaze, dark, wary, and sharp as a blade. She didn't move, only watched him. The fire crackled between them, two strangers bound by something neither had chosen. "You understand me?" he asked. No reply. She blinked once, slowly, then turned her head toward the fire, her lips cracked and dry. He poured a few drops of water from his canteen and held it out. She hesitated, then drank, coughing weakly. "Taya," she whispered, the name catching in her throat. Eli nodded, tasting the word in his mind. "Taya." "All right then." He studied the mark on her side again, that burned eagle inside a sun. He'd seen it once years ago, when the army paraded a captured Apache chief through town. The settlers spat at him, called him savage. Eli had been a boy then, too young to understand the look in the man's eyes, that unbroken fire. Now, staring at this girl, that same fire flickered behind her silence. By dawn, the fire was nothing but embers. Eli packed his saddlebag, then lifted Taya onto the horse's back. She winced but said nothing. He tied his bandana around her wound tighter. "We ride north," he told her. "Water's that way." They moved slow through the Badlands, the sun a white coin in the sky. Eli's throat felt like sandpaper. Taya swayed in the saddle, half conscious. He'd never been this far from town, only dust, rock, and God's cruel indifference. At midday, a storm gathered on the horizon. The wind rose suddenly, carrying sand that cut like knives. Eli guided the horse toward a narrow ravine for cover. They huddled behind a boulder, wrapped in his coat as the desert screamed around them. When the storm finally passed, the world was changed. Dunes reshaped, tracks buried, the air filled with the smell of iron and wet dust. Eli looked at the girl beside him. Her eyes were open, watching the horizon as if searching for something only she could see. "You got people out there?" he asked. She didn't answer, just looked at the sky, then pointed toward the east, her hand trembling. With a stick, she began drawing in the sand. Lines and circles. A canyon. A fort. A group of riders. Then, with slow precision, she drew the same eagle mark branded on her skin. Eli stared. "Those men," he said quietly. "They did this to you?" She nodded once. "And my ranch," he whispered, realization cutting through him like a knife. The brand. The attack. The fire. It was all connected. He leaned back against the rock, mind spinning. Maybe fate wasn't done with him yet. Maybe this girl was the key to what he needed most. Not revenge, but answers. That night, they camped beneath a cliff overhang. The firelight danced along the canyon walls, flickering against ancient petroglyphs, handprints, animals, symbols older than any town nearby. Eli watched Taya grind dried herbs between her fingers and pack them against his leg wound. The scent was bitter and sharp. "Thank you," he murmured. Taya didn't respond, but there was a flicker, a small nod, almost imperceptible. It was enough. He felt something stir in him, a faint ember of purpose he thought long dead. Maybe this wasn't about saving her. Maybe she was saving him. When the moon rose high, Eli's dreams turned cruel. He was back at the ranch again, the night of the fire. Mary screamed from inside the house. He ran to the door, but it wouldn't open. Smoke choked his lungs. Through the flames, he saw men with torches. The same mark burned into their arms. Then Mary's voice turned into Taya's, whispering through the smoke, "It hurts down there too." He woke with a start, hand gripping his revolver. The fire had burned low. Taya sat a few feet away, staring at the darkness beyond the camp. Her head tilted slightly, listening. Eli froze. "What is it?" She raised a finger to her lips, then pointed to the canyon rim. He followed her gaze. For a moment, he saw nothing. Then, movement. A flicker of metal in the moonlight. Boots. Spurs. A low voice drifted down the slope. "Well, I'll be damned." Eli's stomach dropped. That voice, he knew it. From the shadows stepped Clay Dobson, Eli's old ranch hand, the man he once trusted like a brother. Now his face was twisted with a cruel smile, revolver hanging loose at his side. "Look at this," Clay said, spitting into the dust. The Carter boy, still alive, and keeping company with an Apache whore. Laughter rippled through the darkness. 5, maybe 6 men. All armed. All hungry for blood. Eli's fingers tightened on his rifle. His heart pounded. The fire between him and Taya flickered wildly, its light glinting off Clay's revolver. "Didn't think you had the guts to crawl out of that fire," Clay sneered. "But I reckon we can fix that." Taya's hand moved slowly toward the rifle lying beside her. Eli gave the slightest nod. The desert fell silent. Then the night exploded with gunfire. The first bullet tore into the rocks above Eli's head, showering sparks and grit. He rolled behind a boulder, clutching his rifle tight. The air filled with thunder, gunfire echoing through the canyon walls, each report slamming into his chest like a hammer. Taya flattened herself against the sand, her hair whipping in the wind, eyes burning with defiance. "Stay down," Eli shouted, though she needed no telling. He took a breath, then leaned out just long enough to fire a shot. The crack echoed, and one of the shadows crumpled into the dust. 5 left. Maybe more. Clay Dobson's voice rang out, oily and confident. "Ain't no point hidin', Carter. You got 1 gun and a half-dead girl. You can't win this." Eli's reply came in the form of another shot, splintering the rock near Clay's boots. "You always did talk too damn much," Eli muttered. His hands were trembling, the old bullet wound in his leg screaming with pain. Every time he shifted, he left a smear of blood in the sand. Taya crawled to him, dragging his saddlebag. She pulled out extra cartridges and handed them over, her fingers steady despite the chaos. Eli caught her gaze. Silent understanding passed between them. They weren't just fighting to survive now. They were fighting for something bigger, for every ghost that had burned in the fire of men like Clay. The next volley came fast. A bullet nicked Taya's arm, tearing a strip of cloth. She gritted her teeth but didn't cry out. Eli fired twice in response, each shot deliberate, measured. 2 more rustlers dropped. The desert went quiet for a breath, only the wind howling through the canyon. Then Clay's laughter rolled through the air again, low and cruel. "You think killin' a few of my boys makes you even?" Mary died screamin'. "Eli, you remember that." The world stopped. Eli's heart turned to ice. He could still see the fire, the collapsing roof, Mary's hand reaching for him before it all went black. He rose to his knees, rifle aimed, fury burning through the pain. "You should have run while you had the chance," he said softly. The canyon erupted again. Clay's men fired from the ridges, trying to flank them. Eli and Taya moved together, him covering, her reloading, quick and precise. She picked up his revolver, bracing her injured arm against a rock. When one of the bandits crept too close, she fired. The man spun backward, a dark stain spreading across his chest. Eli turned toward her in surprise. "You ever used a gun before?" She gave the faintest hint of a smile. "Learn fast," she whispered. The fight raged on until only Clay remained. He ducked behind a ridge and vanished into the maze of stone. Eli knew where he'd gone. The caves. The same caves the mescalero had once called sacred. He slung his rifle over his shoulder and limped after him. Taya grabbed his arm. "No," she said, shaking her head. Her eyes were pleading, not out of fear, but warning. "I gotta finish it," Eli rasped. "He took everything from me." She hesitated, then handed him a torch pulled from the fire. "Light. Watch the ground." He nodded and pushed into the darkness. The cave swallowed him whole. The air was thick, cool, heavy with the scent of earth and something older. Smoke, maybe, or memory. The torchlight flickered across drawings on the walls. Buffalo, hunters, handprints of children long gone. The silence pressed against him until he heard it. A breath, shallow and close. Clay stepped from the shadows, gun in hand, eyes gleaming like a cornered wolf. "This how it ends, huh? In a hole full of dead Indians." Eli raised the torch. The flame cast wild shadows across their faces. "You burned my home. Killed my wife. You made me this." Clay grinned. "Don't lie to yourself. You were always just waitin' for a reason to pull the trigger." Eli's hands trembled. For a heartbeat, he saw Mary's face again, then Taya's, silent and strong. He lowered the torch to the ground. "I ain't the same man anymore," he said quietly. Clay sneered. "Then you're already dead." The gunshot came almost before the words left his mouth. Eli dove sideways, the bullet grazing his shoulder. Pain exploded through him, but instinct took over. He rolled, fired back. The bullet caught Clay in the thigh. The outlaw screamed, stumbling backward into the wall. Eli's torchlight fell across something glinting near the floor, a half-empty powder keg left by prospectors long ago. He followed Clay's eyes to it and felt the decision form in his gut like thunder. "You burned my world," Eli said, voice shaking. "Now watch yours fall." He struck a match, flame trembling in his bloody fingers. Clay's expression twisted, part fear, part disbelief. "You wouldn't." Eli dropped the match. The explosion roared like the wrath of God, fire rolling through the cave. Eli was thrown backward, slammed against stone. The world blurred, light, heat, silence. When the dust settled, Clay Dobson was gone. Outside, The canyon trembled. Rocks split and rolled down the slope in a shower of sparks. Taya ran toward the entrance, calling his name. She found him half buried in rubble, his face streaked with soot, blood seeping from his shoulder. "Eli!" she cried, pulling him free, her hands raw and trembling. He tried to speak, but only coughed up dust. She dragged him from the collapsing cave, her small frame straining against his weight. Behind them, the cave mouth caved in completely, sealing Clay's grave. The sky above was turning red again, the same cursed color it had been when he lost everything. The wind howled through the canyon, carrying away the smoke and the ghosts. Eli tried to open his eyes, to thank her, to say something that mattered. But his strength was gone. The last thing he saw was Taya kneeling beside him, the torchlight flickering against her face, her eyes filled not with fear but with fierce determination. Then darkness took him. He heard one last sound before slipping away, Taya's voice, breaking through the storm. "Don't you leave yet. Not until it's made right." The world came back to him slowly, not with light, but with sound. The rustle of wind through dry grass. The faint cry of a hawk somewhere far above. Then, warmth. Sunlight pressing against his face. Eli opened his eyes to find himself lying beneath the cracked roof of an old mission chapel, its stone walls half swallowed by desert vines. His shoulder burned, his leg throbbed. For a moment, he didn't know where he was. Then memory came flooding back. The cave, the explosion, Clay's face disappearing in fire, Taya's hands dragging him through smoke. He tried to sit up, wincing. The coat over him wasn't his. It was hers. The girl was gone. Eli looked around the ruins, the remains of a cross still standing at the altar, the ground scattered with feathers, beads, and ash. Beside him, something small caught the light, a talisman made of bone and twine. The same one Taya had worn around her neck. He picked it up, running his thumb over its smooth edge. There was a faint symbol burned into the center, two paths crossing beneath the sun. The same mark she'd drawn in the sand that night. The same mark branded into her skin. He understood now. It wasn't just a symbol of her people. It was a promise. Outside, the desert stretched endless and gold. The sun hung low, warm and merciless. Eli limped to the doorway, leaning on his rifle like a crutch. The wind tugged at his coat. For the first time in years, he didn't feel hunted. He didn't feel lost. He stood there a long time, staring at the horizon. Every scar on his body throbbed in rhythm with his heart, but it didn't hurt the way it used to. The pain was still there, it always would be, but it had shape now, meaning. He whispered into the wind, "You made it right, girl." A faint echo answered him. A hawk's cry carried on the breeze, circling once before vanishing into the sky. Days passed. Eli stayed near the mission, patching the roof, rebuilding the old corral out back. He mended what was broken with quiet patience, as if each nail he drove into the wood buried a piece of his old life. When night came, he lit a small fire and watched the stars, listening for sounds beyond the wind. Sometimes he thought he saw movement on the horizon, a figure standing by the ridgeline, still as stone. He never called out. He knew better than to chase ghosts. But one evening, just before sunset, he spotted a thin trail of smoke rising from the east. Not a wildfire. A signal fire. Apache style. 3 short bursts, then silence. He felt something shift inside him. Not sorrow, not joy, something in between. He took the talisman from around his neck and held it toward the sun, the light passing through its carved holes like tiny beams of gold. Then he smiled, small, weary, but real. Eli saddled his horse, the same one that had carried him through hell and back. He adjusted the bridle, testing his shoulder. The pain was bearable now. As he mounted, the horizon glowed in hues of copper and red. He turned one last time to look at the mission, the smoke curling from the small chimney he'd built, the faint sound of wind moving through broken bells. Then he faced the open land ahead. The west stretched before him, wide and merciless, but alive, full of stories that didn't end clean, full of people who kept walking anyway. As his horse began to move, the sound of hooves echoed like a heartbeat across the sand. Each step carried him farther from who he'd been and closer to who he was becoming, a man who'd learned that redemption wasn't won through revenge, but through survival and mercy. The wind rose again, carrying the faintest whisper, soft as memory. "Don't you leave yet. Not until it's made right." Eli tipped his hat, eyes fixed on the horizon. "I won't," he murmured. He rode until the sun sank and the first stars blinked awake, his shadow stretching long behind him, swallowed by dusk. Somewhere in the distance, another fire flickered, its light pulsing like a heartbeat on the edge of the world. A man and a ghost, riding side by side. Then came the voice-over, deep and steady, rolling through the desert like thunder. The West never forgave. It only watched. But sometimes, it gave a man one more chance to be whole. This was one of those times. The music swelled, low strings, a whisper of harmonica, the slow rhythm of hooves fading into the horizon. "If this story struck your heart," the narrator said softly, "give it a like, it keeps frontier tales alive. Subscribe and ride with us again, into the forgotten stories of the Wild West, where every man carries a shadow, and every shadow tells a tale." The screen faded to black. The wind lingered one last moment, then silence.